do you want to have a talk time?
What are you talking about?
We're going to be talking about what happened about 2 weeks ago, and then kind of what happened a couple of years ago that relates to what happened the 2 weeks ago.
Let's talk about it.
Alright. So, way back when I was, well, probably like almost 10 years younger than I am now, back in about 2010, 2011, I had the misfortune of waking up in the morning after only having 4 hours of sleep and not being able to go back to sleep. So, of course, I got up. Kelvin, my brother, was suffering with kidney stones, so he was on the good medication, so he was zoned out in his room. My mother was getting ready to go pay the rent. All of this is normal things to be doing at about 8 o'clock in the morning, except that I noticed that when Mom tried to talk to me, it was difficult to understand her. And I thought, that's weird, but she probably just woke up, realized what the time was, and thought, hey, I've gotta go pay rent. So I didn't really think that much more about it. And then she tried to pour herself something to drink and spilled it all over the place. Which was weird, because normally Mom had better coordination than that. And then Mom was walking around, and that was weird because Mom normally walks well normally. And so I started watching her after all of this because I'm like, there's something wrong. And then she tried to step outside onto our porch. Now, our porch is not leveled with the doorstep, so you literally have to step down and out to get out. And Mom couldn't even do that. She nearly tripped and fell flat on her face. And I'm like, okay, yeah, something's wrong. I have a sinking suspicion of what it could be. But I'm getting Mom back in the apartment and I'm getting dressed. I did my best to convince Mom to stay home, not worry about that she probably should go to the hospital. But she was insistent about having to go pay the rent. And she wouldn't let me not do that. So I walked with her to pay the rent, and by the time we were on our way back, I literally had to string her across my shoulders and drag her back into the apartment and put her in a chair, like as soon as we walked in the door. Now, I didn't want to scare my mother, because I love Mom, but she easily over-exaggerated even, like, the smallest things sometimes. And so I didn't want to, worry her unnecessarily, but I kept saying, I think you should go to the hospital, and she's, trying to fight me about it, and I'm like, Mom, I think you've had a stroke. And I start having her, lift her arms, smile at me, try to get her to recall things. She didn't really understand, I think, what a stroke was, but she had at least heard of it. And I told her, I'm like, Mom, having a stroke is like having a heart attack. You have a block in your heart, which causes the heart attack. You have a block in your brain, which causes the stroke. If your heart doesn't work no more, you die. If your brain don't work no more, you die. You have to go to the hospital. And finally, I got her to the hospital. I mean, it sucked, but at least we had the official diagnosis of stroke. It messed with her coordination and all that kind of stuff, but at least I woke up and I could be there to see the symptoms and help my mother, so that when that happened to her, I understood and could make the arrangements that needed to be done to get her help. Even though she was trying to fight me along some of that, because that's just how Mom was. And of course, I don't blame her, who wants to go to the hospital and be stuck in ER for only God knows how long. So, that was not the end of Mom's strokes. She had 2 more before her death in 2014. The second stroke wasn't that bad, but the third stroke pretty much done in whatever the first stroke missed. Now, for those who might not know, when you have a stroke, typically it affects your coordination, it affects your memory, and it affects your speech. Like I said, Mom was stumbling around. She couldn't pour herself a drink, and that's because it attacked the left side of her brain, which functions the right half of your body. So she couldn't walk really anymore on that side. She couldn't lift anything with that hand. She couldn't even write her own name anymore. And she also couldn't talk very plain because it affected, her ability to move her jaw and her tongue. But life goes on, and you're able to deal with it, albeit you might be unfortunate enough to be handicapped in certain ways after a stroke. Some people not so much. Other people, like Mom, they weren't willing to help themselves, so they had lingering problems. Mom always put it to me, she's like, I used to be able to peel potatoes. I could stand here and do that for like days. She's like, I don't want to anymore. I get annoyed. I get frustrated. And that's because she didn't have the coordination that she used to have before the stroke. Mom got to the point where, thanks to the stroke, she couldn't wash herself, so I had to do that. In some cases, she had to have help dressing herself, like getting socks on and shoes. I had to do that. It sucks that she couldn't do that on her own, but again, I was happy to help my mother where I could. So, Wednesday, about 2 weeks ago, I had another interesting situation. For those who don't know, I have to commute to work, and that means I have to pay somebody to take me to work. So I had made an arrangement with my next door neighbor to take me to work and bring me home. This worked out pretty well for us the last couple of months. I don't have to pay for a cab, and she gets a little extra money. Things went pretty well. Marylin, normally she talks constantly and a lot, probably about stuff I really shouldn't hear about in regards to her family. She likes to have a conversation, and I'm more of the listener kind of person. That might be a shocker on the show, but I am more of the listener person. That particular Wednesday, my brother had come over, and he's like, hey, Kassie, since I'm here, I'll take you to work. And I'm like, okay, I just gotta let Marylin know. And so I called her, and the only thing she told me is, okay. When it comes to the phone, she just kind of says what she needs to and then hangs up. And that's a little frustrating to me, because every time I pick up the phone, when I end the call, I'm always going to be like, okay, thank you, bye, and then I hang up. Her and her family just hang the phone right up. But that's normal. I didn't think anything of that. And so my brother took me to work. I worked my 8 hours. And then it was time to come home. And like normal, she was waiting to pick me up. And so I got in my car, and I tried to talk to her about, I had bought a cot for when my brother stays over to sleep. But it didn't work out, so I had to take it back and get a refund. By the time we hit that first red light, and we're just pulling out of the parking lot of where I work, going to that first red light, I knew something was wrong. Because Marylin acted like she was gathering her thoughts to like, oh, well, that didn't work out. Well, let me think for a minute so that I can maybe suggest something else that'll work out in your favor. But she didn't get that far. She didn't say anything. She would just keep saying, long pauses, and gosh. And that was all the way coming home. And I thought, okay, that's weird. But her driving was fine, which is what floored me later. Like, her driving was perfectly fine. There was nothing wrong with her driving. So I was like, I don't know about that part. And so then when we got out, she got out of the car, she locked, I think she locked her car, I don't really remember at this point. And she walked down the sidewalk towards our apartment. I stopped in front of my door, and she stopped with me. So I'm like, Marylin, are you okay? And she couldn't answer me. And I asked her, I'm like, Marylin, would you want me to call somebody? She couldn't answer me. And when I'd start, she'd start. And then I'm like, something is very wrong. I don't fully understand what it is. And so then I had a conundrum at that point, because when we pulled into the parking lot, I'm thinking, okay, if she can go on her own into her apartment, then I'm not going to be that concerned, but I will call her niece, because that's the phone number I have. And I will let her niece know that something's wrong and maybe she should check in on her aunt. But I'm like, if I really notice anything wrong, I'll decide what to do then. But Marylin would just stay with me. And I'm not sure if she was confused and didn't know to go into her apartment on her own or exactly what. But I was left with going, something's wrong and I need to make a decision. My first consideration was if I could get her into my apartment, and then what do I need to do? Because her apartment's just like my apartment, but I don't have, like, really any place to sit her down if she needs to sit. Plus, it's not her apartment, thus it's not familiar to her, and I don't want to upset or confuse her if she's not mentally in a place to understand what's going on. But her apartment has stairs she has to climb up to get into. And if she's having a stroke, I don't know if she can actually climb up those stairs. And then I'm thinking, well, I could maybe walk her around the apartment onto her porch and get her in her place. And then I thought, no, if she's having a stroke, I really don't want to drag her across the lawn to the back of the apartments. So ultimately I decided that since she was able to drive, if I did it now, I could get her in her apartment, which is what we did. I walked right up her apartment door, opened her screen, she let herself in, and then went immediately to sit down. And then that's when I called her niece, because I couldn't find her granddaughter's phone number. I think Marylin knew enough to try it that she couldn't talk, and so she grabbed a piece of paper and a pen, but the only thing she could do was she drew one line, and that was it. And I'm just like, okay, that's weird. Like, she's not having classical stroke symptoms, so I don't even know if she's having a stroke, but it might be a stroke. But I'm like, I don't know, I'm not a nurse. It's not like Mom, so I have no idea what's going on. And so I just sat there with her until her niece came. And her niece and her granddaughter are both nurses. They are certified nurses, so they can make a better judgment call than I can. And so she tested her blood sugar, her blood pressure. They tested something out, her oxygen level, because she is on oxygen, not all the time, but when she needs it. So the niece was like, you've had a stroke, you're going to have to go to the doctor. And of course she started like Mom, like, no, I'm not going to the doctor, shaking my head. And I'm like, Marylin, you gotta go. If you had a stroke, you've got to go to the hospital, because you could have another one, or you could be in the middle of something super bad. And then finally we got a hold of the granddaughter, who also came and did all those checks, and was like, yeah, Marylin, you've got to go to the hospital, you've had a stroke. And so finally we got Marylin in a situation where she went to the hospital. I think they said it looked like she'd had 2 strokes, but they were like me and they couldn't figure out how she could drive or walk pretty good. I told Marylin when I saw her in the hospital, and I told her granddaughter when I was talking to her, that I think what happened, and Marylin agreed with me, is like, what happened was probably when she was coming to get me from work, that's when it hit her, because she said she had trouble locking the door when she was leaving to come get me. And that was about 8:30 or so when she would have left to come get me from work. So by some miracle, she had had the stroke at just the time to when I would have been there to know something was wrong and to be able to get help when we got home, and also not crash the car because she still had motor function enough to get us home, which would have been incredibly difficult if she had had a stroke like my mother had had a stroke. because Mom couldn't do anything, and God help Mom if she tried to drive like that. So, as far as I know, Marylin had come home, I think that Saturday, and then she had surgery yesterday to help clear out the blockage in her arteries, which they believed not only was also hindering healthy blood flow to her brain, but also it would prevent future strokes, at least from that. From what I hear from her granddaughter, she's doing good. She's just currently in the hospital after her surgery. So, yeah, twice I've been the person who's gotten help for somebody with strokes. Yay!
Quite a thing to be in. I don't think I got much else to respond to than that.
Yeah, I mean, it's good in case anybody doesn't know, like, like, maybe they've heard of a stroke, but they just don't know anything about, how to deal with it.
It's educational for me. I didn't know how. I wouldn't know
Yeah.
how until now.
Well, honestly, I didn't really know, like, what, like, you kind of go into, like, oh God, what am I supposed to do? Like, I need to get help, but, like, is it what I think it is? Do they really need, like, is it something else that I'm just not aware of, like a different medical condition? Except in Mom's case, I knew what all her medical conditions were because I'd grown up with her. She had diabetes, she had heart troubles, she had high blood pressure, high cholesterol and all that. And, like, I knew how to help with all that, but then, she's doing what I would say are the classic stroke signs. I knew immediately what Mom had. I just had to have it confirmed by a doctor. In Marylin's case, the only thing that I would have considered a stroke sign was that she was not able to talk back to me. Everything else seemed normal, but she couldn't, like, have a conversation with me. So then I was just like, I don't know if that's a stroke or not, because she can drive fine, she's walking fine, she's not riding, really. She drew a line, and that was it. I would say that's a stroke, but it's not like, I don't know, I couldn't really tell if there was much more wrong other than she couldn't have a conversation with me. But see, that's why the rest of her family are nurses and know about that stuff better than I do. And I'm just thankful that I was able to get a hold of the granddaughter to come and do all that, because I didn't think to check her blood sugar, I didn't think to check her oxygen, and I definitely didn't think to check her blood pressure, which, by the way, was high. And if somebody suffers a stroke, it's going to be higher than normal because there's a blockage causing the blood pressure to spike up.